Hey guys, hope everyone's doing well today. It is Halloween, so happy Halloween. Um, so we're going to take a look at kind of in Luke chapter 14, verse 1 through 14. Um, we're going to take a look at that, and then, so here's what I want you to do with me. I want you to picture a scene with me. Jesus is invited for a Sabbath meal by a leader of the Pharisees. He gets there early and he sees a man who is suffering, swollen, and ill. Some scripture versions say he had dropsy, whatever that is. So Jesus heals him just as he had healed the bent over woman last Sabbath in the synagogue. Then the synagogue leader had chastised the woman, and Jesus contending that this sort of thing shouldn't happen on the Sabbath, to which Jesus soundly corrected it. This time it seems no one had anything to say, so Jesus healed the man and sent him on his way. After that, Jesus sits and observes his fellow guests as they arrive. He watches them jockeying for places of honor around the table, like the elders and preachers who showed up at the little boy's home in rural India, which is a story I'll tell you here in a minute. These guests know the pecking order and they relish it. If I'm imagining the scene correctly, they jostle and shove each other, pretending to be dignified while still fighting for prestigious spots at the table, near the host or near another honored guest. After observing the drama for a while, Jesus calls them out with a parable. Knowing full well the social rules of his day, he shuns them and calls instead for a revolution. Not one that requires fighting and bloodshed, but rather a revolution of true hospitality. Hospitality on good terms, on God's terms, filled with love, mercy, and grace. When you are invited by someone to a wedding banquet, don't sit down in the place of honor, he advises them. Go and sit down at the lowest place so that when your host comes, he may say to you, "Friend, move up higher." For all who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. As if that isn't countercultural enough, Jesus turns to his host and continues, when you give a luncheon or dinner, don't invite your friends or your relatives or your rich neighbors, hoping they may invite you in return, so you would be repaid. But rather, when you give a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, and the blind. Then you will be blessed, because they cannot repay you. The scriptures don't tell us how Jesus' listeners reacted. We don't know if they laughed, shook their heads in disbelief, if they questioned Jesus, his sanity, if they argued back, or if they followed his advice. All I know is how I feel, how I find myself responding to this story as I read and reread it. I feel uncomfortable, an uncomfortable combination of surprise, skepticism, and fear. As in, really? Is Jesus serious? Does he have any idea of what he's asking? Obviously, he does. Often, just as I'm growing comfortable, or as we're growing comfortable with our faith, a story like this comes along to shatter our complacency. Don't exalt myself. Don't insist on recognition I deserve, ignoring the pecking order, or worse, upend it. Don't network, don't schmooze. Instead, open my heart and open my home to people who can do nothing for me. People I have no affection for. People I can't impress. People I won't be earning favors from. People who won't make me look better. Why on earth should I do that? Because Jesus insists on it. Because this is who God is. The great reverser of our priorities. The upender of our hierarchies. And the reorder of our values. Because there is no end to the game of who is in and who is out. And God, in his wisdom, knows that our anxious scramble for greatness will lead to nothing but more anxiety, suspicion, loneliness, more hatred, and more devastation. Because God's kingdom is not a kingdom of scarcity, it is a kingdom community of abundance, where everyone is already welcome, everyone is already loved, and everyone is already cherished. And because the currency of that kingdom is humility, not arrogance, generosity, not stinginess, and true hospitality, not fear. Humility, however, is a tricky thing. We often think, and wrongly so, might I add, that to have humility is to think of oneself as unworthy. Even if we manage to define humility in a healthy way, humility can betray us. The very instant at which I claim to achieve humility is the moment when it eludes me. Worse yet, very little in American culture rewards or supports the humble. Whether we're talking about entertainment, politics, sports, or even religion, we in Western culture have an unhealthy admiration for the loudest, the biggest, and the greatest. Whether we recognize it or not, we are known around the world for idolizing the magnificent. What would happen to our conversation if we shunned the word best, not the world, the word? The key to it all is a healthy humility. Not a humility that negates or devalues anyone, but instead a humility that recognizes all people as equals before God. A humility that values all human life and tries to see Christ in everyone. But here's the good news. When we dare to gather at Jesus' table, we are actively protesting the culture of upward mobility and competitiveness that surrounds us. This table is subversive. And living this way, there's nothing easy or straightforward about this. It requires hard work over a long period of time. And yet, to eat and drink with God is to live in tension with the pecking orders that define our world or boardrooms or college admission committees or church politics and our presidential elections. And that can be tiring. But it's what we're called to do. To humble ourselves and to place our hope in a radically different kingdom, to love God with all that we are, and to live out that love and true hospitality to all of God's children and creation. Jesus asks us to believe that our behavior at the table matters, because it does. It matters at this table, the communion table, and at every table at which we have a seat. Where we sit speaks volumes, and the people whom we choose to welcome, the people for whom we make room, reveals the stuff of our souls. This is God's world we live in, and nothing here is ordinary. In this realm, the strangers at our doorsteps are the angels. So, that's what true hospitality is. But let me tell you a story about this little boy in rural India. His parents were devoted members of their church, and it was customary that elders and preachers would often spontaneously show up at their home for lunch after Sunday services. Food wasn't always plentiful, and cooking rice and curry over a wood stove took time. Because the rules of hospitality dictated that the men of God eat first, the little boy and his siblings had to wait quite a while to eat on Sundays. Only when the honored guest had had their fill and left would the little boy's mother gather the leftovers and feed the children. Now, the little boy, being only 4 years old at the time, did not find this weekly occurrence pleasing at all. Who would? Not even I would. I'm 30 years old. One Sunday afternoon, he was feeling especially hungry. As a matter of fact, his mother had already shooed him out of the kitchen a dozen times or more. Well, like any hungry boy, he just lost it. Marching into the dining room where the guests were relishing their second helpings, this little boy stuck his little hands to his hips and yelled, "Get out! Hurry up and leave so I can eat." I think Jesus especially would have appreciated this story. He himself wasn't really known for politeness around food either. The gospel contains many stories of Jesus receiving and accepting dinner invitations during the years of his ministry, and most often those mealtime scenes end in drama, scandal, and even insult. Once, a woman of debatable reputation caressed his feet under the table. Sometimes he interrupted a meal to heal sick people on the Sabbath. Often he ate with dirty hands, shared a table with folks others considered to be riffraff, and sometimes he even drank more than his enemies considered respectable. But worst of all, he said things blunt, embarrassing things that no one cared to hear. So I bet you that Jesus would applaud the little 4-year-old as he broke the rules and challenged the hierarchy. In fact, if I'm reading the story correctly, I believe Jesus would have ushered those men of God right out of the room and insisted that the little children eat first. Favor the ones who cannot repay you. Prefer the poor. Choose obscurity. Guys, I'm still working on Leviticus. I'm almost done with the material for the 3rd video, so I'm hoping to make some videos later. I love you all. Have a great rest of your weekend. I'll see y'all later.